So there's my screen. It's a bit dull. Can we have a whip round at the end to buy chemistry a new bulb for their projector? But if you strain your eyes, you might be able to see what's going on. So that's me, and Fellow of Churchill, Chair of the Winton Centre, also a non-executive director of the UK Statistics Authority, which is the body that oversees the work of the Office for National Statistics, so the census, and all that sort of stuff. So when I say nice things about ONS, I would say that, wouldn't I? Okay, so a bit of background to me. I used to be a proper statistician, doing statistical methodology, probability in artificial intelligence, and Bayesian methods in clinical trials, and so on, and Bayesian analysis of complex models using Markov chain Monte Carlo, which of course has really come to the fore during this pandemic because the really complex epidemiological modeling that's been done is all Bayesian. So I think we won't get into. I'm not going to get into that this evening. Okay. So, but I was really lucky in 2007 to get philanthropic funding from David Harding, who's just given 100 million quid as well to the university for studentships. Hedge fund manager to endow this chair of public understanding of risk. And that enabled me to kind of go into public performance, trying to do a sort of Brian Cox of statistics, I suppose, at which I did not succeed. But never mind, I did my best and made some TV programs, did a lot of schools talks, and wrote some popular books. I wrote unpopular popular books anyway, but never mind. So but then I finally did write a popular book, which is good, which was and then doing TV and things like that. So but then I retired from that a few years ago and was hoping to have a quiet time, and then David actually gave us a whole lot more money to form this Winton Centre, of which there are a number of people in the audience, part of that, and that's, it's a bit dull, isn't it? It's a shame. The photograph we took last week outside Churchill, extraordinary group of people all working in the maths department. Most of these are psychologists, but also communication professionals, web designers, and so on. A wonderful group of people, and who have been extremely busy over COVID, in terms of risk perceptions, and we'll come on to some of this work later on. As I said, I got this book, Art of Statistics, which has done very well during the pandemic. Nothing like a pandemic to sell stats books. I do recommend it. But the subject of the talk is not just about, I will talk mainly about COVID, I guess, COVID stats, whether we can believe them. But I'd like to talk in general about stats and whether we can believe them. Can we trust them? And so interpreting data is not easy. Surely people were claimed when data science was coming up as a subject and big data and all this stuff that, why do we need all this sort of statistical inference when the data can speak for itself? The data can give up its secrets. And this is completely nonsense. And this is a lovely quote from Nate Silver, The Signal and the Noise, that I use in my book, where he says, "The numbers have no way of speaking for themselves. We speak for them. We imbue them with meaning." And what that means is that data does not offer up its secrets. It doesn't tell its story automatically. There's inevitably always judgment that has to be made when we see data. Always. It's inevitable. And that means assessing whether we can trust it or not. And I guess that's what I'm going to carry on talking about. So let's go back to an old example. God, I haven't dug this one up for a bit, but the old red bus. Come on, that's a good number, isn't it? No, it's an absolute crap number, but never mind. This was the leave number, the £350 million to the NHS, and I'm not going to argue about whether it is wrong, so I will argue with it is wrong. The actual true total is about half that, but it is very clever. Now, why is it so clever? And the point is that, numbers do not exist outside a story or context of the way they're told. And the £350 million a week is very cleverly expressed. It's a real artwork, £350 million a week, because I can make that number look small. Now, what do I do? There's a lot of tricks. I love trying to teach people these two tricks that you can do. The first is to do it as per person. That's the normal trick. So 60 million people in the UK, so that's about £6 a week per person, 2 cups of coffee. That's what it is. But then we can make it even, the unit of time, even smaller, and say it's about 80p a day. So we each send the EU the price of a packet of cheese and onion crisps every day. Now, if that was on the side of a bus, That would not have won them the Brexit vote, as I think actually the bus may well have done, tipped people over that. So the number, I can make that number, I can make any number look large or small. Just tell me, what do you want it to look? And by knowing that I can do it, I'm very aware, and everyone should be, that it may be being done to them. So I think it's this matter of data literacy, of being able to take apart a number and realize what story is being told about it. Tim Harford, everyone's got lots of lists of how to criticize numbers in the news and things. I've got lots in my book. Tim Harford's got his lovely book, How to Make the World Add Up, I think it's called. And he's got his list. And his first one, which I thought was odd at first, the first question to ask of a number is, how does it make me feel? Not, can I believe it, or is it right or wrong? How does it make me feel? To look inside yourself at the feelings that it arouses. Because by doing that, you identify quite quickly what somebody is trying to make you feel. Are they trying to reassure you or frighten you? And we'll come back later to what we might consider principles we might try to adopt if we're trying to be a bit more ethical. Okay. Oh, by the way, the numbers from the Remain side were just as rubbish. I mean, this claim about how much this was, this is based on GDP, big assumptions, no uncertainty. You don't divide GDP by the number of people to work out what it costs everybody, and so on. So nobody's got anything great to be proud of in terms of their use of numbers. Okay, so let's go back to COVID. That was just bringing some general principles. And there's been a lot of data about. That was from an hour ago. An hour or so ago, there's the latest update to the coronavirus dashboard, which many people may also look at 4 o'clock, like I do every day, to see what's happening. Quite interesting things happening this week. Roughly we see cases going down, deaths going up, hospitalizations going up a bit. Okay, so did anyone see this headline? Actually, yesterday, it was the headline, I think it was in Today, because it was the number that came out yesterday. Yesterday, they announced 293 new COVID deaths reported in the last 24 hours. So Mirror had this headline, COVID deaths up 15% in a week with 293 fatalities recorded in just 24 hours. Now you'd read that and think 293 people had died in 24 hours. No, it doesn't mean that at all. And in fact, this is, I think after 18 months, they're still writing headlines like that. They still don't realize how unbelievably unreliable these daily figures are. And yesterday's was even more unreliable than usual. I mean, as we know, Tuesdays is always very high, but this one is amazing. It was, first of all, there was just 40 reported the day before. But secondly, if you looked carefully at the dashboard, and to be honest, you did have to look rather carefully, they said due to a technical fault, they weren't collecting any data on Sundays. So as a result, the data of the next few days may be higher while the records are entered into the system. So there's always a delay because people don't put the data in on Saturdays and Sundays, so that means Sundays and Mondays are low and Tuesdays and Wednesdays are high. But this week is going to be even higher. It jumped from 40 to 293. No, but that is, I think it was a bit naughty not to put that a lot more prominently. We might have been able to avoid those headlines. This was an untrustworthy number. And this is a nice graph, actually in The Guardian. It's from our book. I'll get onto a serious plug later on. But this just shows, over the whole of the pandemic, the number of deaths reported by day of the week. So the red is what was reported on Sundays, and the blue is what was reported on Wednesdays, which is more than twice what it will be on Sundays. And this week it's going to be, probably 5 times what happened. And it is. No, today it was 200 and something. It's Wednesday today, isn't it? Yeah, 211 or something today, and it was 40, so it's 5 times the ratio. So this is ridiculous. By Thursday, you can just about trust the numbers. They're not bad. So just don't do anything until Thursday. So, I mean, this is extraordinary, and this was realized ages ago, but some of the media have not yet caught up to it after 18 months. Okay, now these are much more reliable figures. These were from yesterday, from the Office for National Statistics. And as I said, I'm biased, so I'll say I would like that. And if the bulb was a bit brighter, you'd be able to see it in more detail. Can you see what's going on there? Can you see? Sort of. Here, yeah, at the back, you're a bit iffy. I'll point it out. Okay, if you strain your eyes, now this, I mean, I could give a whole lecture just on this slide because it is extraordinary. So these are the weekly death registrations. Now, these are being reported by the National Statistics System since about 1845 or something like that, when William Farr started his weekly reports on death registrations. No one's taken the blindest bit of notice of these things for about 180 years until the epidemic started, and now at Tuesday at 9:30, everyone's grabbing this to see what's going on. So these are death registrations in England and Wales, and the graph immediately over the whole period, the graph immediately points out that there's big dips here, because if the registry office is closed because of a bank holiday, you can't register the death. And so this has got, artifacts, the bumpiness are artifacts. But at least it explains it on the graph, which is quite nice. The other thing you might notice about the graph is that the main takeaway message is in the headline. This is an innovation that ONS are doing, which I think is very good, to try to get as much as possible explanation and interpretation onto the graph, so not buried somewhere in the text or anything like that. I think they could do a lot more with this, we could talk about. Anyway, the green are the deaths from other causes, the blue have got COVID on their death certificate, and the black, if you can see it, is the 5-year average from 2015 to 2019. So just some things to point out. Now, I think these are trustworthy statistics. I trust these because they're they're facts. They are. They're where people walked into a registry office and registered to death. Now, the first thing to notice in the first wave, staggering, double the normal mortality, but excess non-COVID deaths. These are almost certainly COVID deaths. One of the big fusses, of course, is that no one was being tested. People being sent home from hospitals to care homes without being tested. These will be people who died in care homes, who weren't tested, and a special dispensation was given that a death certificate could be completed by a doctor even though they hadn't seen the patient. And so some doctors quite reasonably were unwilling to ascribe a death as COVID when they had no direct evidence it was due to COVID, especially as the symptoms in very older people can be rather different. So these will have been COVID deaths. So all these, that's an undercount that we're doing. Here is very different. You might be able to see there's a black line there. So we've got a deficit of non-COVID deaths, totally different pattern in the second wave. So what's going on there? Well, I'm sure you could have lots of ideas. One of them is that there was no flu. Because we're all wearing our masks and keeping away from each other, no flu. What's going to happen this winter is very interesting indeed, but that saved 10 to 20,000 deaths for a start. Also, some people who would have died here of other causes have died here. So what's called mortality displacement. Their deaths have been brought forward by a year, known also by this unfortunate term harvesting. And that is, look it up in Wikipedia, that is the term used in epidemiology for mortality displacement. So some people were harvested early. It's not a term I tend to use with the media, as you may understand. So, but not as many as people might think. Early on, and I thought it was a lot, people were saying, most of these people would have died soon anyway, because they're old. No, that's not true. The average number of years lost from a COVID death is 10. Now, it's still that, actually many people would have died within the next year, but that is not the dominant feature. Where we are now is fascinating. We've got excess, there's quite a lot, about 100 COVID deaths a day, and some small excess in non-COVID deaths. Now, people are looking very aware of the first signs of the long-term impact of the total disruption of the health service for the last 18 months, in terms of delayed cancer diagnoses and so on. There's actually no sign of it yet. And in fact, the actuaries say that if we do a more refined analysis of what we would expect, given the age change since 2015 to 2019, it looks like there's actually negligible excess non-COVID deaths at the moment. So really complex story. Look at that. You could talk for ages just about that. And that's, of course, not the whole story. Statistics, they only raise more questions. So for me, one of the interesting things there is, where are these people dying? Now, this is something that I've been banging on about, not just me, for a year and a half. Is first of all, look at the graphics, the use of graphics. You can see again the main interpretation in the title, and this is what's called small multiples, when you have the same, graphs with the same axes being repeated in a grid, because the human eye is extremely good at then running your eye along and seeing what's different and what's important. So the use of small multiples has been, a lot of that been going on now with ONS. Now this is where people have died. The excess deaths over the 5-year average in hospitals, in care homes, and in home. This is the interesting thing in the whole graph. This is the big, I would say, the thing that I think deserves enormous investigation. Many of you will have suffered losses during this pandemic, and dying in hospital with COVID has been, worse than most ways in which people have died in the past. Most people would prefer to die at home, and that's what they're doing. 35 to 40% more people are dying at home now since the start of the pandemic, and that's not because of COVID, and it's nothing to do with how much virus there is circulating. This is a huge structural change in where people are dying in this country. And it looks like there's no end to it, and it could very well be permanent. So it, of course, raises lots of questions as to, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, we don't know. Most people would prefer to die at home rather than in hospital, even if, especially not if it's with COVID protections going on. What's the quality of these deaths? Now, there's been Marie Curie have been promoting this idea of the difficulty, increase in workload. Are these people being cared for properly with the Macmillan nurses and so on? I think, something I feel quite strongly about personally, is that there's a real absence of statistics on the quality of death. And I think this is absolutely important and something that really deserves a lot more care. Anyway, a little bit of diversion, but I think it's really important. Okay, so been a busy time. There'd been masses of data coming out. I'll talk a bit about my experience of talking to the media. Everyone's asking opinions. I was, 5:40. I was on LBC talking to Eddie Mayer about the statistics or whatever. And it's I really admire the work of this UK Science Media Centre, who work putting journalists in touch with academics. Because of working with them, I get press releases before, under embargo, at the same time the journalists do. So I see all the publications, all the announcements before they go public, and so can comment on them in time. So there's enormous work. It's a great institution. But the real thing is trying to remain non-aligned, because the media love blame and speculation and conflict, of course. That's what they love. So you say, I'd like to explain the data, and you go on, and they immediately start saying, well, what do you think about the government, what the government's doing at the moment? And what do you think will happen this winter, and so on? It happens all the time. Just say, not my job, I don't know. So there's a huge need always to avoid that sort of questioning. And in fact, Kevin McConway, another statistician who's done a lot of media stuff, we've written a whole article on how to be a statistician having to deal with the media and communicate. Sound human. Now, for a statistician, that does take a bit of training. So that's why we say the first thing is get media training in order to practice sounding human. Because we do tend to, various things, we cannot use terms like confidence interval, statistical significance. None of these things, just cannot use them. So you have to find a different way to say everything that one's used to. I won't go through all of these, but just some of them I would point to, beware of never just have a chat with a journalist. Never. Unless you absolutely trust them and you have agreed that this is off the record. I've been stitched up too many times. So make friends with them. And don't, stick to explaining, control the nitpicking, keep off the jargon. But the other thing is you'll get things wrong. I've got everything wrong, made every mistake, every disaster has happened. But you just got to keep going. Okay, the other thing that's been interesting in trying to communicate stats is that back in January I was asked to do a column for The Observer, some of you may have seen this, 350 words, and then Anthony Masters, my colleague, joined in, and we've been going ever since. And we keep on saying, are you sure you want us to carry on? So we've done 43 of these things, I think, now, on a different statistical issue. And I'll talk about some of the more controversial ones in a moment. But it's been, very interesting, but it's a real challenge writing. Those of you who try to write popularly, Have you tried to write anything in 350 words, a complex topic? It's really difficult. It's twice as difficult as 700 words. It takes twice as long. All that old thing about, I haven't got time to write you a short letter. Anyway, we got this book. I can't give a talk without taking advantage. Good book. Excellent book. Lots of copies and heifers. Heifers, they put it next to the till. Ah, yes. That's why we wanted a small hardback, hoping it'd be next to the till. You know, Mary Beard got away with it. I don't see why we shouldn't. Anyway, that has been going all right. Now, some of the things we can talk about in the book, and I think these are trustworthy statistics. This is fascinating. We go, oh, I'm sorry, we used some yellow. It's so stupid. It doesn't matter anyway. Ignore that bit. This is, you know, when people ask why has Britain done so badly, you know, essentially we were buggered right from the beginning because we had no border controls in March and we had 1,000 separate outbreaks in this country from France, Italy and Spain in early March. People coming back from their holidays to all over Britain, not just in one area. In Spain and France and Italy, it was really concentrated in particular areas. But people came back, spread it with 1,000 individual outbreaks erupting over that entire country. And we know that from genomic analysis. We can spot these with separate introductions. I could mention that the peak here is about the 10th of March, which happens to be the date of the Atletico Madrid match against Liverpool, when 3,000 Madrid fans came over who were not allowed to go and see a football match in Spain at the time. Okay, another surprising fact, and I've got to be careful interpreting this, the pandemic has been a net lifesaver for young people. Now this is real data. In 2020, 300, is it 300? Yeah, 300 fewer people aged 15 to 29 died than normal. And that includes 100 or so who died of COVID. So maybe 400 whose lives were saved who would normally have died of other causes. So that's 300 fewer families mourning a young person's death. They don't know who they are because these people don't know that if the pandemic hadn't come along and they were locked up at home, that they would have died in car accidents and violence and accident and drunkenness, which would have been the reduction. So this has been a net lifesaver. I'm not saying this is a really good thing to lock up young people. Everyone under 30 shouldn't be allowed out of their houses because just to save their lives, keep them safe. So I'm not saying that at all, but it is an interesting fact. But of course, the suffering, you know, the mental health, the increase in anxiety and depression, not an increase in suicide, but of course is there as well as a disrupted education. So, but you know, if we're looking at trustworthy statistics, this pandemic has saved young people's lives. Okay, so now I'd like to get, you don't have to study that table, you're not supposed to look at that table in detail, but it's one that was produced by Public Health England, which is now UK Health Security Agency, a few weeks ago, or about a month ago now, and this has caused enormous trouble. Okay, so so I'd like to just talk about some really, I want you to assess whether these statistics are trustworthy or not. This was, okay, for a start, these are good statistics, and it shows the number of cases in unvaccinated people in different age groups, and this is the number of cases in fully vaccinated people. And you'll notice for everyone over 40 that the number of cases in fully vaccinated people is hugely more than the number of cases in unvaccinated people. The cases are dominated, for everyone over 40, by people who have been vaccinated. They're the ones who are producing the great majority of the cases. So, what does this mean? Does this mean the vaccines don't work? No, because this has been picked on by anti-vaxxers. No, but the argument against it is quite subtle. You have to say, well, most over 40s have been vaccinated, so nearly everybody is in that right-hand column. You know, vaccination isn't perfect. It only might prevent about, reduce your risk of infection by about 2/3 perhaps. So there's a lot of breakthrough cases, and so there's more people there. Well, somebody said it's, whereas the risk is higher in this group, a small proportion of a large number can be bigger than a larger proportion of a small number. Do you think that works as an explanation? I've never tried that in a public announcement, but you're a skilled group of people, so I think you can get it. So our story is like seatbelts. Most people who die in car accidents are wearing seatbelts. It doesn't mean seatbelts don't work. It just means they reduce, and they work very well indeed at reducing the risk. It's just that nearly everyone is wearing a seatbelt and they're not perfect. Okay, so this is known as, base rate fallacy or something. You're not considering you're not considering the denominator, how many people are in these groups. We tried to explain this back in June. Why most people who now die with COVID in England have had a vaccination. This was about deaths rather than cases. Unfortunately, that headline alone is what appeared on the Twitter thing from Guardian. This was massively tweeted by anti-vaxxers as an argument against vaccination because they didn't include the subtext saying this doesn't mean they don't work. Anyway, so we got into a lot of trouble for that, and et cetera, et cetera. This was not appreciated by some, but I'm never quite. This was one of my favourite tweets we got. David Spiegelhalter, Anthony Masters, and the entire lying genocidal editorial board of The Guardian should be hunted down and destroyed for crimes against humanity, period. Which seemed a bit strong, to be honest. And we never quite worked out what they objected to. And, I mean, we're fortunate. We're white men. I'm old and grey and everything like that. We don't tend to get the threats and real abuse that other people do. Certain amount, but not too much. And Anthony replied very nicely, that seems harsh. I thought it was a good article. And then I said, yes, perhaps a bit harsh, but I've had worse referees' reports. And that started a whole Twitter thread of people saying, with mock referees' reports saying, well, referee 2 says you're a genocidal and should be destroyed. I therefore invite revision to your paper. Anyway, that was okay. We can deal with that. Oh, they got banned from Twitter for threats. I didn't report them, but other people did, and they got banned. So you can't find that account anymore. Okay, so, but now, what about this one that came a few weeks later? This shows not just the raw numbers of cases, but the rates per 100,000. So we can't use the seatbelt argument. And this shows for over 40s, the rates per 100,000 are higher in the vaccinated group than in the unvaccinated groups. Not for the 80s, but between 40s and 80. What's going on? Our argument that we'd made has now disappeared. How can this be? This was tweeted out by Robert Peston, who frankly is a great journalist, but he did withdraw it and cancel, delete the tweet and everything like that. But then damage was done. This has been picked on by anti-vaxxers. It's featured in Joe Rogan's podcast in the States to 10 million listeners, where this data was poured over saying this shows vaccinations don't work because cases are higher in vaccinated groups, et cetera, et cetera. Complete disaster in terms of communication. Okay, so what's the problem? And it's quite a subtle one, in fact. The main problem, there are also problems in the two groups are not comparable because, vaccinated people may be more cautious, they may be more likely to go and get tested, for example, maybe less cautious, they may be more likely to get tested, all sorts of different ways in which these groups differ. Unvaccinated people might just never go for testing, even if they've got symptoms. So there's all sorts of ways these groups differ, but the crucial one is the fact that we do not know how many people are in this country. This is because we haven't got the latest census data yet. We don't know. And let's take people, I think you might be surprised by this. People aged 40 to 49 in England. Medical records, what's called the NIMS data, estimate 8.1 million. But there's a lot of double counting. People who have moved may be on 2 registers at once. People who have moved out of, so lots of people are on 2 GP registers. If you add them up, you get millions more than the known population of England. ONS, however, estimate there's 7.1 million in this age group. According to the 2010 census, revising for births and deaths and things like that. But with migration, again, we don't know how many people there are. So, this is quite a big difference on its own. But it's even worse because we do know that 6.4 million have been fully vaccinated. So the number of unvaccinated now, there's enormous uncertainty about it. It's somewhere between 1.7 million or 0.7 million. and that's in the denominator, so it totally changes what we think the rate is when we just don't know. I think it's nearer the 0.7 million, but it's not that, probably not that low. It's probably a bit higher than that. We don't know. So if we assume the ONS estimates, which will put the population too low, then vaccinated are at lower risk than the unvaccinated. But the NIMS, the ones that Public Health England are doing, we know are far too big. So we wrote an article about this as well. I think, they should have realized the problem. Public Health, I don't think they should, I think this is not reliable data. They shouldn't have published it, or at least published both that and ONS. And putting some warnings at the bottom of the page is not enough. This is still being picked on by anti-vaxxers. Now, just this week, 1st of November, there's been an official public complaint made by the Office of Statistics Regulation to Jenny Harris, head of UK Health Security Agency, about this data. And this is not a trustworthy communication of stats. So this is quite serious business. They don't do this lightly to make a public complaint between the stats regulator and an official body. So that was quite strong. And that got coverage yesterday, or the day before. This is, with the UK Stats Watchdog. And again, I got a conflict of interest. I'm on the regulation committee that oversees the work of the Office for Stats Regulation. Okay, so let's finish get on to the last bit of the talk, which is about trust. Okay, trust. As soon as anyone mentions trust, because the talk is can we trust statistics, you've got to just go for Onora-O'Neill, ex-head of Newnham, Cambridge philosopher, Baroness Onora-O'Neill, wonderful, wonderful person. I mean, I don't like TED Talks. Oh, God, they really irritate me. But if you want to listen to a TED Talk, one's brilliant. 9 minutes for TEDx Parliament. Small, powerful woman, just belting it out. She's got jokes, philosophy, trust, all about Kant and things like that. She's a philosopher of Kant. Just brilliant stuff. And I use her sort of sound bites. I use all the time in all my talks. That's better than the stuff I say. And she said, for example, and this is the biggest insight I think I've had, and it's so simple, but it's so powerful, that organizations and experts should not be trying to be trusted. We all want to be trusted, and we get asked, our centre, how can we get the people to trust us? And she just says that's the wrong the wrong idea. You've got it the wrong way round. You should be trying to demonstrate trustworthiness. I've never read any Kant. This is the Cambridge Philosophical Society, isn't it? So I can mention Kant, and I can also say I've never read any. But I do know something about duty ethics. So it's just from the principles that this is the right thing to do, that you should be trustworthy. And then if people want to offer up their trust, then you've earned it. But if you haven't earned it, you shouldn't get it. You don't deserve it. So first of all, before anything, you've got to be trustworthy. This is, for me, an immensely powerful idea, and it's influenced our work in our centre hugely. It's also influenced the code of practice for statistics. Now, I don't recommend this for bedtime. Well, I do, if you suffer from insomnia. I do recommend this for bedtime reading. It's a great, but it's a very strong document, and it's really powerful in it. And it's under that all these public letters, complaints get made. And they've got 3 pillars, and the first one is trustworthiness. So the national statistics system in this country is #1 priority is trustworthiness. There's quality and value there as well, but trustworthiness is built into the national statistics system, and which is an extraordinarily, I think, powerful and simple idea. I use this a lot, and I did this rant on Andrew Marr last year, which got 1.7 million views. It's only a 1-minute rant. I got on Gogglebox. Amazing. It is a high spot of my career. Definitely, I was on Gogglebox. And anyway, because I did a rant about it, there'd been an awful briefing beforehand where they were spouting out huge numbers in great detail, saying so many tens of 100,000 tests had been done, and that of course included tests that had been sent out and all this nonsense. And I called it number theatre. But the crucial thing, which took off as a term, but the crucial thing I said is not trustworthy communication statistics. So it's a great thing to be able to throw at people now because that's the official consideration. Now we must remember that scientists, non-trustworthy statistics can occur for the best possible motives. People with the best possible motives can still be untrustworthy. And we've got to deal with that within the scientific community, I think. This was a nice headline from 2019, apocalypse warning, insect population must be saved or life will disappear. Slightly over the top, but other National Geographic, insect populations are plummeting and why it matters. A new study suggests that 40% of insect species are in decline, a sobering finding that has jarred researchers worldwide. So The Guardian, look at that, 40% of insect species are declining. Total mass of insects is falling by a precipitous 2.5% a year. There'll be, there won't be any insects by 2000 and something or other. Now, when we look at the paper which reported this was a meta-analysis in a apparently respectable journal. They were very good and honest about their methodology. Now, they didn't do any original research, they just searched the scientific literature. And they reported their search terms of how they searched the scientific literature. And we can see there that what they reported, what they looked for, were studies about insects and were surveys, and that mentioned decline. And guess what? They found a decline, because they only looked at papers that were reporting a decline. Isn't that extraordinary? And they were interviewed about this on More or Less, totally unapologetic. We've got to alert people to this problem. So they found the evidence that supported their argument, got it published in a journal, and were completely unapologetic about this. In fact, it's quite interesting. If you search on decline, you get 699 citations. If you search on increase, you get 2,345. Kevin McConway found that out. So who knows? I'm sure insects are declining, and it's terribly important, very important indeed. But this is deeply untrustworthy science and cannot help, should not be used, just like that. Okay, finishing off now. Yeah, I keep on saying that, don't I? Yeah, anyway, I will. What's the time? I want to make sure I got time for questions. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. I will finish. Yeah, we've at the Winton Centre, I've tried to codify this. Everyone likes lists. Basically the principles, hugely influenced by Onora-O'Neill, the ethical principles under which we think their trustworthy communication can be done. And the first one is you have to decide, are you trying to persuade somebody or are you trying to inform them? Maybe persuasion is okay if you want people to evacuate, maybe even if you want them to stop smoking or exercise more, all these worthy things. But actually, you should be honest to yourself and really to them that you are just trying to persuade them and you're cherry-picking evidence to do that. Otherwise, you're trying to inform people, raise the level of the debate, etc., etc. And that means being balanced, not a false balance. Benefits and harms of climate change are not the same, but let's actually look at the thing in the round. Winners and losers, benefits and harms for everything, even climate change. Disclose uncertainties, obviously, and state the evidence quality, which we could talk for ages about, but I won't do that now. But I think it's unbelievably important that we do communicate when the evidence is not very good. SAGE have got very good at doing that. Many bodies are now saying whether they've got low or medium confidence, inspired again by climate change. IPCC have been doing this for years, saying when they've got low confidence in a scientific finding. And pre-bunk misinformation. We get in there fast with the misinformation. That kind of went wrong for us when we tried to point out that this data about the vaccines did not mean the vaccines don't work. So we kind of messed that up, but I still think it's the right thing to do, to get in there fast to correct misinformation. Now, where we ended up using that, our ideas, was back in April. If you remember the findings of these awful blood clots that are happening, particularly in young people, and about the Astra-Zeneca vaccine. And we got the data from MRHA, and we knew a press conference was going to take place, and we did some analysis, and this was mainly Alex Freeman and John Aston doing that. But I had a phone call with Jonathan Van Tam in the morning, and we sent him some graphics we'd prepared. Alex Freeman had done spending all night on it, essentially. And we thought they might, be inspired by these, and in the end, he used them. Amazing. JVT went through live to a large number of people, a very important briefing, went through very complex statistical graphics. And he did it slowly, treating the audience with respect. I thought, he's not really going to go through that, is he? And he did it. Very impressive. And it worked. So basically, these are what we prepared. And the whole idea was try to encompass this idea of balance, benefits versus harms, but also stratified according to important subgroups. So this was looking at the harms and the benefits of vaccination in different age groups, based on a low incidence of the virus as it was back in March. We also did medium and high. Now we're in pretty high incidence, and there'd therefore be hugely much bigger benefits from vaccination. But basically, what this says is that for the harms, these blood clots, the risk is low. This is per 100,000, so that's only 1 per 500,000 for people my age. But it gets much bigger as you get younger, whereas the benefits increase massively as you get older. And we chose intensive care admissions, it was our choice, for the benefits because it was roughly equivalent severity to the harms we were looking at. And also we chose 16 weeks, again pretty arbitrarily, although it has now become a bit of a standard as a comparison. So for people my age, it's a no-brainer what the benefit risk calculation is. But for 20 to 29-year-olds, very finely balanced, and the recommendation was that they don't get this vaccine. And then it went up to 39 that they don't get the vaccine. So this went down very well indeed. We had pictures of it stuck up on the walls of clinics. It was copied in various countries. It's translated. We did it for Italy and Spain and so on. European Medicines Agency copied this format. Very simple. No uncertainty on it, but I thought that was adding too much complexity. And also in a later version, we included more sub-notes saying what wasn't on the graphic. In other words, those aren't the only benefits and harms. In particular, there's nothing there about the benefits to other people of being vaccinated, which is hugely important, but we can't put a number on it. But at least you should mention it. And so there's this principle now, I think, that on a graphic you should report what isn't on the graphic. And it mustn't be in the text underneath. It's got to be inseparable from the JPEG. It's got to be in there so that people have to see it on the graphic. Okay, so just finally, how many times am I going to say just finally? Nearly finally. Another Onora-O'Neill little soundbite, just in case for anyone who wants to take pictures of the slides. They will be up later on. She's, trustworthiness. She emphasizes transparency. But what she calls intelligent transparency is fundamental to trustworthiness. Now, transparency isn't just going what people call fishbowl transparency. You just go blah and put vast PDFs on the web and this thing which nobody can make head or tail of. That's not transparency. Transparency is when you really want people to understand what's going on. You really work to make sure that people can see what's going on. And so she's got these lovely principles about this, about data or anything else. First thing is that information must be accessible. People have got to be able to find it. That's not so difficult now. It's got to be intelligible. People have got to be able to understand it. And that's something in our center we test a lot. Just do people understand this? And you can do this. You can test this empirically. It's got to be usable. And that's what is a tricky one, because it's got to be one that answers people's questions and their concerns. And that means listening to the audiences. First rule of communication is shut up and listen. What are they worried about? And then the final one, and this is the neat one, accessible. People have to be able to check you're working if they want to. Almost nobody does. On the stuff we produce for patient advice, we put in the methods and the formulae and the references, and nobody ever looks at it. It doesn't matter. It's trustworthy to put it in there in case somebody wants to check it. So, conclude. We need good statistics. That requires resources. Trustworthy communication is vital to all stakeholders, and we need to be able to assess whether to trust those statistics. So we can't always trust stats, and the onus is on the people who are presenting the stats to make sure their trustworthiness can be assessed. Just to finish off, as I said 4 times, just a little warning for those of you who want to engage with the media, and I strongly encourage people to do that. It can be an interesting experience. Before Christmas, I was on the Today program talking about Christmas restrictions, and I said that obviously singing, raised voices could spread the virus, and that singing may be banned. In our choir, we're on Parker's piece, masks 2 meters apart, singing our choir, singing our carols outdoors. That was all right. we did it. And I then thought, being a bit mischievous, it might be a good idea to ban family arguments. I mean, imagine all shouting at each other in an unventilated room over the turkey. There's nothing worse for spreading the virus. You're bound to get it. Anyway, this was a joke. And, but an hour later, in the Express, Christmas warning, families could be banned from arguing to prevent COVID spread, according to a leading British statistician. Hooray! So I thought this was a career highlight, I must say, in terms of public communication. So I'm going to stop there, and thank you very much indeed.